Hey geeks! Oh my word, there is literally no shortage of leaders to make fun of. The French education minister has been criticized for giving pandemic guidelines while on vacation in Ibiza while cases in France were surging. You gotta wonder what that must have looked like. Oui, merci, c'est un sujet extrêmement important. Depuis 2 ans, je travaille 7 jours sur 7 sur la gestion scolaire de la crise sanitaire. On va envoyer 70 millions de masques chirurgicaux et 5 millions de masques FFP2. Ciao, ciao, moi, seront mis à disposition pour les enseignants de maternelle et les professeurs qui le demandent. Moi. Au sujet des capteurs de CO2, on n'en a pas besoin en tout cas. Oui, je suis à Ibiza, mais bon, l'hiver, ce n'est pas du tout comme l'été. Ciao. That was too much fun. And most of that were his actual quotes. Before we get started, please hit that subscribe button below and like this video. The CIA just came out with a report saying that the Havana Syndrome, which has been plaguing US officials around the world, is not likely a sustained worldwide campaign by Russia or other foreign actors. This comes just after news that 4 US diplomats in Geneva and Paris became sick with Havana Syndrome symptoms. So first, what's Havana Syndrome? Havana Syndrome is a condition that first emerged in Cuba in 2016 when US diplomats, covert operatives, that's the code word for spies, and other government officials and family members fell ill with similar symptoms. The condition often starts with some kind of noise people hear or pressure they feel, and then they suffer dizziness, nausea, and debilitating headaches that often last for years. So it was called Havana Syndrome because we first saw it in Cuba, but then our officials started coming down with similar symptoms in other parts of the world, like in China, Russia, and Europe. 6 years in, the US government still doesn't really seem to know all that much about it, like what the cause is and whether or not it's a deliberate attack meant to harm US officials. They had previously suspected that the Russian government might be behind it, but they haven't found definitive evidence of that, though they haven't ruled it out either. And a team of experts is trying to test different technologies to see what could cause these symptoms, since one leading theory points to the use of directed energy attacks, kind of like if someone pointed a massive microwave at you. This matters a lot. Most importantly, because these individuals, people who've been injured while serving our country, are truly suffering. But also because they might be being attacked because they represent the United States. So what does that mean for how we should respond, and could it cause a chilling effect on people who want to work abroad with the US government? Luckily, I had the opportunity to talk to Mark Polymeropoulos, who recently retired from the CIA after experiencing one of these attacks while he was in Moscow in 2017. He's the author of the book, Clarity in Crisis: Leadership Lessons from the CIA. Mark served in the intelligence community for 26 years, and he's an expert in counterterrorism, covert action, and human intelligence collection. He's one of the most highly decorated field officers, and he knows what he's talking about. Hey, Mark, I'm so lucky to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me on today.
Oh, of course. Listen, the pleasure is mine. Can you tell us, do you think the government is doing enough to get to the bottom of this? Is there more they could do to prevent these types of attacks and help those who are suffering from them?
So what a great question, because you can pose it in kind of 2 ways. One is the actual question itself over Havana Syndrome, but also it almost is about the future of the intelligence community. So I'm going to give you a pretty clear answer: is they're working on it, but I think they have a failure in imagination, because the world has changed. So what I would like to see is not only the traditional kind of means of the intelligence community in collecting signals intelligence, human intelligence, but what about open source? What about big data? And I remember when I was in government, I watched Bellingcat in essence solve the big conundrum, the big problem of who tried to kill Sergei Skripal in the United Kingdom, in Salisbury, and an open source firm, investigative firm, Bellingcat, did that. So I would argue that with this advent of big data, governments, intelligence services have to rely on these commercially sourced intelligence firms to really help. So I know the government's working on it. I don't think they're doing enough, and I'd like to see kind of the open source world really assist in this problem. I think that's how ultimately we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Thank you, Mark. Makes a lot of sense to me.
Thanks.
Over the weekend, a British national took 4 people hostage at a synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. And after 11 terrifying hours, the hostages were able to escape unharmed, only after the rabbi there threw a chair at the hostage taker while the others made a run for it. Law enforcement then ran in and shot and killed the hostage taker. This was a terrorist attack. An individual whom British intelligence dubbed as a subject of interest 2 years ago flew into New York legally, got himself to Texas, got a weapon, and successfully took people hostage at a synagogue. Meanwhile, most of the US press and Americans on social media are debating over who dislikes Senator Manchin more. Let me explain why this is a big deal. Some of the protocols we have in place to prevent this type of attack failed us, which doesn't exactly send a good message to terrorists looking at us from abroad. Now, this guy was not known as a terrorist. In fact, British intelligence had closed their investigation on him because they said he didn't pose a terrorist threat. But his own brother, who tried to help end the hostage situation, said that he suffered from mental illness and was known to the British police because of crimes he had committed. In fact, his brother had no idea how he was able to fly to New York. I was personally stunned at how little people seem to care about this attack, and so I wanted to talk about it so that people don't accept this kind of behavior, and certainly not targeting American Jews, as normal. It's not normal. It's a major threat. We have to speak up and consistently be vigilant, or criminals in the future will again take advantage, putting both Jewish Americans and all Americans at risk. So, Chamath Palihapitiya, who's an American venture capitalist, said on a podcast that he co-hosts that nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs. He said, "Do I care about a segment of a class of people in another country? Until we actually clean up our own house, the idea that we step outside of our borders about somebody else's human rights track record is deplorable." That's what's deplorable? You know, there would be so much here to get outraged over, except this guy actually comes off super ignorant. And this is from a guy who's the CEO of an investment fund called Social Capital, the mission of which is apparently to advance humanity by solving the world's hardest problem. This guy's arrogance is a little shocking, given that he was born in Sri Lanka and moved to Canada when he was a kid as a refugee. Now, he may not personally care about the Uyghurs, and he clearly wasn't born with an empathetic bone in his body, but I thought about what he said, that nobody cares. And sometimes it can be a struggle to get people or business leaders to care about genocide and human rights, and why businesses do need to take a stand. To be honest, most companies didn't used to care, and that was because the majority of Americans probably didn't care. Disney filmed Mulan in Xinjiang, China. There was actually outrage over it, but Disney basically told us to go pound sand. Times are changing though, and I find that more and more businesses and more people here do care about this stuff. And they're increasingly aware, and they don't want to buy clothes or watch movies, for example, that end up enabling or fueling repression. I asked the Geeks what you all thought, and 64% of you said this guy was wrong, that people do care. Anyway, the US government basically requires you to care since they've sanctioned those abusing Uyghurs and they've banned imports from the Xinjiang region where they're being abused. Chamath owns 2% of the Golden State Warriors, which put out a statement saying he doesn't reflect their views. And after all the criticism, he made an empty apology on Twitter where he said he believes that human rights do matter. Oh, he'll definitely be getting an invite to a human rights conference now. As idiotic as what he said on his podcast was, it could end up sending the wrong message and making the Chinese regime think it can continue its genocide. So for that reason, Chamath is on my list this week. Over the weekend, a volcano deep under the sea in the Pacific Ocean erupted and caused a massive blast. In fact, it's the strongest volcanic eruption over the last 3 decades, and NASA says it was 500 times as powerful as a nuclear bomb. This volcano is 40 miles from the archipelago of Tonga, and the eruption caused super forceful tsunamis that swept over the island. Tonga now suffers from significant destruction, like villages have been destroyed, toxic ashes everywhere, communications are down, food supplies are low, and there could be a real lack of clean drinking water. So for those of you who want to help, the Red Cross and the UN are working to get aid to the country. But I'm particularly loving the story of Tongan Olympian Pita Taufatofua, whom you may have seen before since he's a famous athlete in taekwondo and cross-country skiing. He set up a GoFundMe page to raise funds so that as soon as they can get in touch with the island, this money can go to where it's needed most, be it hospitals, schools, or water purification plants. He's raised nearly $500,000 so far, so if you're interested and want to help, please check his page out. Thanks, Geeks! If you liked today's show, then please click the like button and don't forget to subscribe. Or if you just like my crazy energy, then follow me on Instagram and TikTok where I live to entertain people. And finally, if there's anything in particular you want me to cover, let me know on social media. I will give you a shout out. Thanks, Geeks. Stay fabulous.